Welcome, listeners, to Connect the Dots. I'm Alison Rose Levy, here with you every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the Progressive Radio Network. I'm a long-standing journalist of the environment, food, health, media, public policy, and popular beliefs and attitudes that influence our ability to understand what's going on in our society and protect the earth and future generations of children. Each week on Connect the Dots, we talk with different advocates, activists, authors, scientists, movement leaders, filmmakers, poets, all different kinds of people who look at our interconnected world from varying perspectives. On today's show, we have a returning guest, Jodie Evans, the co-founder and director of Code Pink, as well as an after-school writing program in Los Angeles. She's been a visionary peace activist for several decades and is involved with a host of activities through her ever-evolving and always exciting methods to promote peace. Jodie graced our show here, Connect the Dots. I think it was like 5 to 7 years ago probably. We had last spoken on the show when at actually a Bioneers East Coast conference in Massachusetts where you spoke, Jodie. And it was a wonderful conversation. And at this critical juncture for our country and for the earth, and for women who are the major participants in Code Pink, I think it's wonderful and very timely that you can be here for this conversation today. Thank you so much, and welcome to Connect the Dots.
Thank you so much for having me on. Always love being in conversation with you.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I feel the same way. It's been too long, but it's great to be doing it now. And I think this is a very timely moment because we have a lot going on in the government and in our world. You know, we have Australia on fire. We have an impeachment hearing. We have, declared act of war in an ungrounded, illegal fashion. On the part of our government. We have a recent controversial incident at a debate as well as a forward moving into the primary season. And we face a lot of choices. Everyone, but especially women, are at the forefront at the moment in terms of what we need to embrace and what we need to do to alter the destructive trajectory that this society is on. So I'm hoping today we can, garner your wisdom on that to really help people get oriented, because I think so much of this is going on simultaneously, it's kind of overwhelming. So I guess what I'd first like to ask you about is how, I've mentioned several different things. You could pick any one of them or two of them, or how do you how would you define or sketch a kind of overarching picture that kind of holds and explains where we are at this moment, that is kind of prompting all of these different things to be popping up and happening?
Oh, awesome leading question. Let's just explain the world right now. But actually, for me, that's not so hard. So as an anti-war activist, first let me just start as a feminist, which is what I, started out with in 1960, coming into the world as a feminist. I was an anti-war activist. I was also a maid making $1.87 an hour, and it was organized to march for living wage, and we won. And so it really set me on the path of taking on the man and the structures that were violent and oppressive and destructive that I saw in 1968. So in many ways I have done that. I, by the way, ran 3 presidential campaigns. So watching this one is always, watching them is fascinating, the patterns that happen and how much passion and, how they build to a crescendo. And I was sad that Elizabeth Warren didn't know that when she reacted to not shaking Bernie's hand the other night, because it is kind of the gladiator ring of our time. And it's really important when we're in these races to remember that they are a certain form that this country uses to kind of call a candidate, and one becomes who one will be when they lead through the process. And so it's super important to stay heart open as much as possible, and remember that it's a process, and that what we want to really see is that how human can we stay in these processes, because we think a campaign is hard, but serving in elected office has its own extremes that the campaign itself tempers people to be able to be in. But I digress. So
no, that's not a digression. I think it's a really amazing insight, actually, because just exactly the nugget that you described from your long experience, created actually, a very unfortunate division in the progressive movement. I think right now we're moving past it, but to see
with the
that
help of Hillary, who decided to attack Bernie.
I know. I think actually, I absolutely agree with you. Exactly, because it's like she's done more for us than that particular event, which was quite harmful and led to a loss of trust in many directions. Among people who are aligned in other ways, which is something unfortunate and very ill-timed to see in this important and dire election. Well, I hope the results won't be dire. But what we're facing is, right now. But yeah, she did a huge favor. I in fact was joking that Richard Branson was on the phone with her, inviting her to take a getaway and come onto his yacht before she could help the progressives anymore. But that's my savior fantasy is that her folks, her people, whoever they like or dislike, who has the task of trying to kind of walk her away from the public podium right now. Not enviable, but I
would say that is a moment of where I felt being a woman in leadership made a difference. But it also was that I was serving as a campaign manager for a man who agreed with me. So it's just as a feminist, I behaved differently. But Jerry Brown, whose campaign I was running, also was aligned with the feeling. And that was in the middle of, winning. It was like there we were on the trajectory. We were winning all the states. And then the Clintons took us on. We created the campaign not to win, but to raise an issue of if you don't get money out of politics, it doesn't matter what you stand for because the rich will always win. And so that was really our commitment. And the beginning of the campaign it was $100 limit to the campaign. And this is before computers, et cetera. So even just to get the contribution, we had an 800 number, which became a cultural joke and a celebration. But when we started, I said, don't worry, Jerry, they won't let you win. They'd kill you first because you don't represent them. And so when it got down to it, on no money and no staff, we were the last two standing, Jerry Brown and Clinton.
Wow.
And the Clintons got really nasty and full of lies, and I had watched them do it to every candidate, including Songus in Florida, a guy, and it was so distressing to him. His cancer came back. But there they were lying and just, trying to pull us down with every method. And I'd been running the campaign the whole, for 9 months. It was, March or something. And all of a sudden, all these men show up for the New York primary, and they want to make a commercial, and they make a really hateful commercial about like all the things that Clinton does wrong. And this is after you watch him lie to the American people and everyone just swallow it about Monica Flowers. Mm-hmm. So I saw the commercial and I said, nope, didn't get in this race to do that. And they'd already delivered it to and it was supposed to start playing in an hour. And I said to Jerry, I can't. That's hateful. That's mean. It's a level of personal that we didn't get in this for. We're here because this is politics, and we are playing on the political platform about issues that people need to understand. If you go there, we lose everything. Mm-hmm. And he agreed. He didn't want to go there either. And we pulled them all. And I closed the campaign down that day. And I was like, no, that's not what this is about. And do you know, I saved the money we had left, took over the convention for 2 days, actually was able to clearly show the difference between Jerry and Clinton, and did not lose a delegate because they were there because they believed in something. And they could not be swayed, no matter how much was thrown at them. And that reminded me of like, yes, we are, this theater, as a presidential campaign, is about values, and it's about the issues, and it's politic. And we forget that, politic is a form that gets corrupted every day as we try to make it mean something else. And so, yes, remembering that this is theater and that it is the place that you want to use to demand where someone stands and understand differences, because it really sets a tone for the whole country for a very long time. Wow. Yeah, so all that said, back to being a feminist. Being a feminist
I just want to do one follow-up. I just want to do one follow-up on what you just brought up in describing for one thing, it's an amazing reflection to think about what would have happened had your campaign prevailed. To the whole course of.
That's the thing I know better. It would not have prevailed. It would eventually have been eaten alive by the lies, and doing that then was going to bring out other. It's just going to become a fist fight at the level that doesn't serve anything. So there's the wisdom of knowing the game you're in and how it's played and how it plays out, which is why, by the way, Code Pink was the first organization to start a campaign against Trump when everyone thought we were crazy. We saw what was coming. In January, the year before, started a Dump Trump campaign, and went to the media with it, got hundreds of famous people to sign on to it who also thought we were crazy, that he had no chance of winning. So it's I think important. This goes to the question you asked me. It's important to know how things work. And so why are we where we are today? So yes, as a feminist, I'm a socialist because feminism is about equality for all. As I was raised into what feminism was, which meant immediately I was a socialist, as is Gloria Steinem, as was Martin Luther King, as were the people when I was young in the 60s who influenced me. So understanding, colonialism, capitalism, neoliberalism, understanding all the forms that we've been living inside, and I say living inside all of us. It's the thing that is always shocking is that we are against things while we are supporting them.
Yes.
So for me, the war economy, which war serves, has brought us to this moment. The war economy is the extractive, destructive, oppressive economy that is sucking the air out of the world. It is killing us, it's killing our communities, and it's killing the planet. But it's what everyone gives their time to and gives value to, actually. And then, as I'm an anti-war activist trying to end war, and I see, well, I'm not going to end war until I end the war economy because it's serving the war economy very well. And guess what? All the people who want peace are funding it.
Are funding the war economy?
Yeah.
And can you unpack that a little bit?
No, they're funding war. The people who want peace are funding war.
Right.
Because 65% of our tax dollars funds war. So we fund war so it can serve the war economy, so it can make the rich richer and the poor poorer. Just FYI. But there is a peace economy. It is the giving, sharing, caring, thriving, relational, resilient economy without which none of us would be alive. And every year it gets squeezed and squeezed and squeezed to death, just like the sanctions we place on countries that are socialist and want to share their oil with the people instead of the United States of America. So let me unpack that a little.
Mm-hmm.
All the things that care for us, that give us life, the planet, teachers, healthcare, caregivers, parents, it's like that, those roles get devalued and squeezed, undermined, and strangled every year. If you go back to the 70s, when I started, into work, it was a very different world. And I have to say the Clintons play a big role in creating inequality. But when you create, and this was known, it's like in my work, it's like there's global inequality, there's global climate change, and there's $1.4 trillion worth of weapons sold a year. Long ago, I looked at that and knew this would happen, because this is what happens. This is what happens when you undermine and shift value and suck people's attention away from what is real and true and of actual value to life. You get away with freaking murder every day. This government. Look, things you didn't mention was a real coup on Bolivia, just like the coup we did on Iran. Same playbook. Same kill the general, fund, put in an American general that goes in and hands out a bunch of money, and then they threaten Evo with his life and burn down his cabinet's houses and kidnap their kids. The United States of America just did that. Got away with it. We support a war on Yemen that is causing the biggest humanitarian crisis on the planet. And for 2.5 years we worked on getting a war powers resolution to stop it. Trump vetoed it. But there's no Republicans that care enough. There are 7 Republicans who care enough to vote to save people. But the fact that life itself has become so devalued. I watched 1917 the other night because it's truly an anti-war film. When you're at the end of that, you just see how horribly ugly war is. But in 1917, less than 5% of innocent people died in war. Yet, numbers that are too hard to even grok actually died at war. The people that were thrown at it by their governments. Now, in war, 5% of the people who enlist for war die, and 95% innocents die. We see that in Guantanamo, it was over 95% were innocent. But that's because Bush put them in, a prison. Obama just killed them with drones, and less than 5% of the people he killed with those drones have been identified as what could be operatives of what we would call an enemy, not sure they're actually an enemy. War, we're funding these wars. War is the greatest contributor to the destruction of the planet. The U.S. military and big oil. First, let's just start with these wars that are devastating the planet, people, and our pocketbooks that could be funding actually the things our lives need. are about oil. So let's
Yes.
start there. But they are also the biggest users of oil. It's the single largest institutional consumer of fossil fuels in the world. It also sucks the money that we need to address the climate crisis, which could be addressed like the attention that, to go to the moon. You could take that $1 trillion and invest it in infrastructure jobs. People, the way the war gets funded is that weapons manufacturers make sure that a part is made in every congressional district. But those war jobs are not the best jobs. You could actually take and triple or quadruple the jobs that come out of war funding. It's also the biggest, most wasteful organization there is. I have a nephew that works in one of the weapons manufacturers, and he calls it communism because it's like you get a job, you don't have to do anything really well, and you're just paid every day. So there's no accountability. And it leaves a ginormous toxic legacy. I mean, military operations, not just where wars are happening, but where bases are, of which there are 800 now on the planet. They leave these PFASs that are they don't die. They contaminate forever. We haven't learned how to get rid of them. And the Pentagon has now spent, I believe it's $20 billion just last year on environmental cleanup of bases. Of course, wars ravage the fragile ecosystems that they are taking place in. Not only wars, but just putting in the bases itself. Code Pink has been in many countries working to try to stop bases in the most pristine places in that country. It also, so look at just the wars in the last 20 years. But, you can look back to Cambodia and the bombing of Cambodia and what that did to Cambodia, both environmentally and then creating the space for Pol Pot. But it's the same. It's like you look at how destabilizing it is, and then it creates really dangerous, social and political situations. I mean, Afghanistan has been warred on for 50 years. And so what, we just added another war for the last 20 years on it? I went to Afghanistan when Obama just got elected and brought back 4,000 signatures from women in Afghanistan asking him not to escalate, which he did, which cost more money, more lives, and more destabilization of Afghanistan. If he took that money and invested in the women, which were not being invested in, which are still never invested in by the United States, $7 trillion later, Afghanistan is I can't even talk about it anyway. So just that whole destabilization, and then which creates more violence against women, and then it creates a destabilization that, the U.S. imperial power right now and its weapons are what allows it to not be held accountable to treaties, both on climate change and war. And then, of course, there's mass migration that's caused by war, that's destabilizing to communities and undermining of the countries that take them in, and, destabilizing to whole generations. And then it causes increased military state violence. And then we always have, the nuclear war, which is that hover that is a real existential threat to the planet. And what's really distressing right now is, there was a lot of concern, not a lot of engagement, but a lot of concern that World War III was on the brink with Iran and Trump. And I've watched it disappear, and very little engagement, I just want to say, comparatively. And, that's just Trump is trying to force the Iranians to go back into refining uranium because they want them to break the peace treaty that U.S. has already broken as an excuse to actually go to war with them. And so they sanctions, and then they have a triple sanctions, and they've had a quadruple sanctions, and Iran is staying firm. It's staying committed to what it was committed to with all these countries. But killing a general, I don't know what's going to happen. And if they start to refine the uranium again, Trump is going to argue that they have a weapon, and he's going to have the argument for his October surprise. And he already has threatened that he knows about these new weapons and he wants to use them on Iran. So, yeah.
When you recount this, and it is just, a horrifying but, a step-by-step interconnection of all of these disparate, apparently to people who are not as, informed about this, disparate elements of, what we're actually doing. And, of course, a lot of this, obviously, most of it did not originate with Trump. I mean, he's worsening it, without a doubt, but it's been going on for decades prior to his coming on the scene. In what way do you look at the current primary, Democratic primary, the nomination, and the odds of a Democratic Party intervention in this? I mean, one thing I noticed at the debates, and especially from the outset, was that with, 28 or however many exactly it was, candidates on the stage, almost every single one, with few exceptions, maybe, I know there was one exception who's, a proudly anti-war candidate, Bernie Sanders, but, everybody stood up and, talked about America's place in the world and our right and our noble role, supposedly, which is a completely, whitewashed perspective of what you just described, of being, the policeman of the world. I mean, did I miss something? I heard everybody in turn, and in fact, whatever their difference in positions on other matters and policies were, there was a uniformity in agreement about that. I mean, is that what you noticed?
They want to. Yes, of course. It's like we're here to serve the empire. We don't want to talk about what it does to the planet. It's why we get here, because everybody pretends we live in another world that we don't live in. We live in this world that we are destroying, and so people want to just pretend and talk about it, and everyone will swallow it. I mean, that's another thing that feminism means to me. It means being the political is personal, and the political must be engaged with, even though, our system just tries to disconnect the political from the personal, the political from even the planetary, it misses that everything is connected. And I think that's part of being a feminist, that it is all connected. And for me, that to me is what I understand feminism to be, and that I live my life out of. It's like, if it is all connected and we are behaving this way, the shadow side of this is really going to be ugly, and it's real. Now, what I know is that this is a really interesting race, because let's go back to Jerry's campaign, where nobody, quit, and a lot of people started a lot of things out of it, a lot of beautiful things, and one of those was Progressive Democrats of America, that was created by Deputy in my campaign, and he's the one that convinced Bernie to run out of the Jerry campaign. He said, we can do this, if there's truth, and if there are people that will respond, and it feels really good, and you have to do it, and then he died, and so at his funeral, Bernie said, okay, I'm going to run, and his name was Tim Carpenter, and so it's like these long, the change, we understand change is a long arc, and that we always have our shoulder against it. And so you have in Bernie's campaign, like all the people I was, in Seattle with in '99 against neoliberalism and the violence of the World Bank. Out of that, I've watched so many organizations start, but also be feminist. and be anti-imperialist. And in that process, them transform ourselves out of the structures that we were breathing in. Literally notice where we are also the oppressor, we are also the extractor, and how do we continually change the way we behave to take ourselves out of, to divest ourselves from the forms we live in that have tried to convince the world that it's all that can exist, even though it's very new structure, and that, you know, Marx said long ago that it would kill itself, you know, that the end of capitalism is, you know, the destruction of everything. And you watch the Financial Times, you know, heads of corporations are saying capitalism has failed. So you people get the war economy has failed. And there are tons and tons of people who have learned not to be separated from each other, not to be in identity politics, but to understand that parts of their identity are being oppressed, but not to be identity politics, to be a politic for all, for the planet, for the people, for equality, for justice, and not justice like gets thrown down your throat in the United States, justice where laws are only created for rich people and corporations. But the justice we know internal to ourselves, the justice that is about justice, and every human being knows what that is. And, you know, interesting, like when you're in Afghanistan, one of the things I heard from American soldiers, he couldn't understand why the Afghan people were so committed to the Taliban. And I watched an Afghan explain to him it's because he understands justice. And you only understand power.
Wow.
And you know, an amazing American soldier made a movie that really tells that story. I actually can't remember the name of it right now, and it didn't get any play. But he went back because he experienced real justice in Afghanistan and his life was saved. And he went back and made the movie about it because it was for him coming out of a country where there are so many lies, you live layered in lies, to actually be in a place of authenticity and real human justice was a profound experience for him.
Wow.
So that campaign exists, and that campaign is Bernie. It's not about Bernie. It's about the people in the campaign who have fought long and hard to understand and are grounded in values. I mean, the other thing the war economy does is it takes us out of grounded values and has us bobbing around like corks on an ocean, ungrounded from anything that we could actually make choices from. But this, you know, Bernie's campaign is full of people that actually do make choice, actually have evaluated, actually do know that it matters. It matters because they know, because they hold that. It matters that you are committed to something with your life. Martin Sheen tells a story about like somebody going to the gates of heaven and God saying, you know, take off your shirt, let me see your scars. And the guy says, I have no scars. And God looks back at him and he says, was there nothing you could find worth fighting for? And that's the thing. It's that Bernie's life, what you can see in his life is there were things for him worth fighting for, including not becoming a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, just seeing the lies of those two parties and knowing they were wrong and standing in that. A Democratic Party that stands for the rich and still tries to suck the life force out of the poor and the dispossessed. I mean, to me, in some ways, the Democratic Party is more disgusting than the Republican Party because they actually do believe in something. I asked Van Jones a question. He was in the Obama White House, and I used to go and see him every week and ask him, tell me what happens inside so I can kind of understand what's coming. And because he's working to end incarceration, he's partnered with Gingrich. They have this 50-50, cut 50. They want to cut 50% of the incarcerated people. And so he goes into the White House a lot because Gingrich's staff is running the White House. So, by the way, I talked to Van the other day, and in 18 red states, he's freed 151,000 years of people of color's lives by changing laws, with Gingrich, by the way. But anyway, amazing. I said, so what's the difference between the two White Houses? He said, all the people I knew in the Obama White House, their goal in life was to be in the White House. Everyone I meet in the Trump White House, their goal is about an issue and a value.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, so there you are, that soldier in Afghanistan, experiencing real justice, and and being able to tell another American soldier, oh no, you're about power. That they can recognize that because they live in something else. That you're about power and we're about justice.
What do you?
I mean, it's why Trump could say, I could shoot somebody in the face on Fifth Avenue and still win. He funny. It's like in his own crazy, insane way, could see how insane things were. He plays on it all the time. He succeeded by playing on everyone's willingness to deny and not ask questions and not challenge. I'm sure he was challenged, but he just would go to find somebody who wasn't, which is kind of how he does this. It's like, I don't care if I'm challenged. I'm just going to go find the people that are going to appreciate what I'm doing. So, that peace economy I told you about, at Code Pink, we work on getting people to divest themselves from the war economy, including cities and states and pension funds, because we're all invested in war. We're all making a killing on killing. Churches are invested in it. Cities are invested in it. Your pension fund's invested in it. Everybody's invested in war and making a killing on killing. So, just working on that by teaching people it's the water you swim in. If you want peace, you've got to quit swimming in the water and making it happen because you're actually the participator, both funding it by your taxes and funding it as an investment. And then there's also practices of ways that the war economy system creates our behavior. And you can see it like when I went to Iraq before we invaded, or when I'm in Iran, or, when you're in Cuba, you can see the way someone behaves in a more socialist setting. Iraq was a socialist country before we bombed it. Everyone had free education, free healthcare, and free housing.
Amazing.
It creates a very different. Yeah, Iraq was the most educated country per capita in the world, more PhDs per capita than any other country in the world. And we've definitely, turned it back to the Middle Ages, including women. We've sent them way back to the Middle Ages. They were free and running things and not covered. And, because that's very clearly how you can see war is not good for women, is look at Iraq or look at Afghanistan. I did a big study on the women in Afghanistan. I actually helped produce a movie before we bombed Afghanistan on Afghanistan, and before all these wars started happening on Afghanistan. Women were running around running things, more women in colleges, and they were in miniskirts. So it's a very short period of time. That's the 1970s. So we moved from, really at Reagan, when he changed the world, to neoliberal politics, Reagan and Thatcher, we were in a very different politics. And I would say we were with, those that are attracted to Bernie, it's that they're grounded in socialism, they're grounded in justice, they're grounded in understanding the system is broken and it's a system that's broken. And they work on the ground, on the issues. They understand them. They're very real. And they don't separate themselves from each other. They love each other. It's a campaign built on love. There's so much love. Here in Venice, and being outside with 20,000 people, just full of that much love, was pretty profound. It was like, here's my home.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel then about women who, in because of our wounds, because of our experiences of patriarchy, who don't look at the entire continuum of what our economy is about, but who feel that if we nominate a female leader, or a female candidate, candidate for the presidency, that there's some assurance that a correction will occur.
I feel a lot of things. I mean, compassion, liberal feminism has been on the rise since the 70s, and it's far from being a movement of solidarity. Liberal feminism has worked to disseminate the values of neoliberalism capital, at the expense of women, especially women of color, migrant women, it's kind of the lean-in feminism, and it's kind of where they get fed. And where you get fed is where you believe truth is. And look, we're starting out of Could Pink, a feminist foreign policy project to deliver a feminist foreign policy to the next president. Why? Because we looked out at the polls after, our work on peace with Korea, and more women were against peace with Korea. And never in history have women been against peace. And it was like, holy shit, we've failed, because what infects everyone's brain is imperialism, is this idea that you talked about on the stage of the debate. It's like that's reality for people without really understanding the cost of that. So I feel like if they really knew the cost, and I've walked a lot of people through this. I mean, Could Pink is an early defender of Palestinian rights, and it's taken years, but walking people who are even Israeli to the place of seeing a Palestinian as a human being. Well, if you're caught in a system that you're rewarded in, and you think that's reality instead of, the purveyor of violence in the world, then it takes a while to deprogram that.
Yes.
It's kind of like watching Hillary yesterday and going, how crazy stupid are you? Like, to even make a statement like that, except she wanted to be provocative and sell a movie, which I get. But really, did you not understand that was just going to serve to expose you for kind of how shallow and cruel and addicted to the war machine you are, and how really, really, really loved Bernie is? I mean, but as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, you get to the place where it's let them eat cake. You're close to France, because you really are living in different worlds, and the world that calls itself the world of capitalism is blowing smoke up your ass, and so you feel like you're hot shit. And and you get fed it. Winners take all. Read, winners take all. It really, you get in this kind of swirl of I'm in the good team. I'm part of the good team. And Anand Girihardas, he unmasks it. The winners, they're taking it all. It's a charade. But it's feeding people. And yes, and people and women, rightly so, are freaking angry at the patriarchy and the violence they have had to live inside of, but they haven't quite connected to thoughts to the system. So, I feel it's a lack of education. Part of why we really want to do this feminist foreign policy, to articulate really clearly the difference between, why for me is Elizabeth a problem? Because she is really bad on foreign policy. We already watched a black man win that was really bad on foreign policy, and they just get used by the generals. And Bernie has spent the last 4 years getting really deeply schooled in feminist foreign policy. He reached out. He said, I feel it. He's somebody who learns and wants to learn, and he got schooled, but he makes the right decision in the right moment so quick right now that I can see it's become him. It's not like he has to ask you the question. If the thing is happening, he's responding and he's right on it. Even if it's a very, very threatening position to his election.
To hold. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's doing, and so what happens is those people who know what the right thing is get more and more drawn because we need courage to change this world. We need to be uncomfortable. It's like Jane Fonda and Fire Drill Fridays. You know, being 82 years old, leaving your life and all its comforts, and moving to D.C. in the cold and the rain and the snow, getting, willing to get arrested every Friday, bringing your friends to get arrested every Friday. It takes being uncomfortable to change, and so few people are willing to be uncomfortable. And I have to say that Black Panthers taught me about identity politics, and it's how the powers that be separate you. And I was schooled by them very early in the 70s, never, ever do identity politics. It's how they win.
So that is really fascinating. And so what would it look like if you wouldn't mind kind of walking us through some of the different identities and, talking about, the issue seems to be, or one of the issues underlying this seems to be that when one has been in an oppressed or victimized class of people, there are several things operative. One is, to get equity and justice for yourself and your community. Another is to get a seat at a table, which can then become an entree to joining the perpetrators. Another is,
so I guess that
feeling,
moves to the power. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, another is because of my wounds, I want to hang out with people and we rehearse that endlessly, and then we only trust someone who, resembles us and can hear our particular issue when, as you point out, everything is connected and there are all these interlocking issues that the person representing, my issue may not embody all of them. And then where does that actually leave us? So, those to me are all of the risks of going down that pathway. But, how do people, what have you found, what do you find is a key points or understandings that help people move on from that?
Well, yeah, you have to move through all of those things. I don't think I would want to deny anyone the opportunity to fully rage where they sit, because it brings wisdom. All of the stages bring wisdom. So they're all necessary. It's the problem that the structure gets you stuck in one. I'll just say I went to Ferguson. I watched how fast things get co-opted. There were more CIA and FBI in the streets than there were activists. And then all the structures that serve the empire, the foundations and the big organizations that are funded by those that want everything to stay status quo, swoop down and try to take it over, calm it down, and quiet it, and use identity to do that. So I got to watch it really up close and personal, and so it's to be able to create the spaces to be able to move through these things to deeper and deeper wisdom. We live to become wise, but if we get stuck in an identity or in a place and call it there, then we miss the process of becoming wiser. And we're here to learn, use what we learn and grow and be able to be of use to each other, instead of being fed pablum and lies and think they're real and then, be fed stone soup. There's amazing people are getting, so why I said that we're in a really important race is because there are more people smarter about the system today than I think, almost since in the 60s, when I think it was a time when people were smarter, or say the 30s. But we've come back to that time where enough people have been kicked out of the system, enough people have been left behind that they aren't sucking at the tit of it, and they see it for what it is, and they want to take it down because they know it is violent. And they watch that violence every day in their lives. And those people know that Bernie is the only answer.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and actually, it is quite.
And if you want to join us in the streets on Saturday, the rest of the world knows that too. There's a global call for peace in Iran on Saturday, and it's what's interesting. It's about the U.S., but there's more happening outside of the United States that's happening inside the United States because we have such a short attention span. And instead of seeing, we barely missed World War III, what do we need to do to build to make sure that doesn't happen again? Because it will. Everybody just disappears and finds another thing to distract them.
Yeah, I hear that.
I'd love to see in the street. I'd like at Code Pink. You can go to codepink.org and find out there's something near you. There's 150 locations in the United States.
That's fantastic. We won't be airing this before next Saturday,
okay.
But I'm glad to know about it, and I can promote it on my webpage. Okay. And if there's another action for the following week, then you could say it right now, and then we'll include that in the edit of the show.
So at the end of May, on Memorial Day, to really recognize in a true way, to honor those that have been killed in wars, there will be a week-long global engagement of activism against war and militarism and for the planet and the nourishment of all life. And you'll be able to find out more at codepink.org.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. The acceleration of these different, kind of things that are popping or, and happening in our system right now becomes incredibly distracting and overwhelming. And so people will back away from the news, or they'll fixate obsessively on, one of these or another. Obviously, if you had to kind of prioritize what people are looking at, you've just been sharing with us throughout this program, your major priority, which you see and which is completely overarching and pervades all of the others. Are there any, I'd love to hear your comments on, are there any other priorities that you find really also important, and are there other of the possible kind of pulls on our attention that we get involved with and distracted by that, from your perspective, are not as essential on our plate right now, or ever, maybe in some cases? I'd love to hear your perspective on some of those.
Well, anything you can't touch, I would start with, here's what happens. We live in grandiosity. We live in an empire. We don't realize it, but it does affect our thinking. And so everyone's about the big and the big effect. But guess what? It doesn't happen that way. Actually, change happens small, incremental, build, and affecting a culture. And so one of the things we say out of the war economy, peace economy work is that the one thing you can do that will help you, your community, and the world is to just find something in your community that is the most affected thing by the war economy. In my community, it's homelessness and also education. So I started an after-school writing program, and I work with homeless youth. But ground yourself in that first, because you have to be, whatever you do, it needs to be relational to your heart and to what you know and have to offer. And so many people, I spend all of their day in opinions and the folly of fretting, all waste of time, and all that time you do that, the war economy wins. But if you take the time that you spend, worrying, which does no one any good, and actually engage in what has affected from the war economy, your community locally, you will ground yourself in the real. Reality works in fractals, as, we learn in science. Get inside the fractal. And that you can only do locally, that you can only do with your own heart, mind, and body. Once you do that, I promise you, and once, at the Growing a Local Peace Economy, you pull in 8 friends or 8 strangers in your community and you start to work together, you yourself will become a different person. You will be grounded, which is the first place to start. You will learn how to listen, which will calm your spirit. And you will learn how to be engaged with what is true and real, with what you have to offer. Once you start doing that, many things start to grow out of that. But if you can't create a healthy, brick in the bricks of the future that we need, we're not going to get anywhere. All this on the big stage is a theater. And I say to anti-war activists, you didn't start the war in Syria, you're not going to be able to stop the war in Syria. But you are going to be able to build a brick for peace for the future. And we've been so distracted and so caught up in so many other things, instead of really building healthy culture where we live and being a healthy organism inside of that culture, that, the only answer is death and destruction to ourselves and the planet. I am sorry. So we have to turn around from it, quit going off the cliff with it, and create something else.
Wow, powerful. That's wonderful. Thank you. That's amazing. And it's also heartening because not everybody is drawn to or interested in, or finds the great stage that accessible. I mean, that doesn't mean we can't phone bang for Bernie or vote for
yeah,
the right people.
Yeah, but that's local. Think about that. Mm-hmm. All the things you just said are local. Not only vote. Mm-hmm. If you are voting, that's great, but don't just vote. Be engaged. Mm-hmm. Fall in love with. I don't really, I'm for Bernie, but I also allow people to fall in love with whoever fits their values in the moment. And that's all going to be educational, because it'll let everyone else know what needs to be taught, both the powers that be, which they learn how to manipulate us more, and those that want something healthier that will learn what they need to be doing with their life in between campaigns. But it's not about voting. The politics is the personal, and that's also part of being a feminist. And the politic is what we live inside of. And, people that are voting for Bernie don't need to be called. Mostly, they know it because they're working side of the mess and they want it to change. So we engage locally from the place of wholeness and heart and love, and then creating the conditions that nourish life. It becomes super obvious who to vote for.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. We've come to the end of I'm thinking of the New York subway system, which we would like to be free. So, and, the homeless people on the system and the people begging for food in the system in our neighborhoods here. That's what comes to mind when I hear you say that.
Yeah, so just a reminder that homelessness is created by the system. The system only works if there's homelessness and poverty. So whenever I get a fight in my neighborhood about how to treat the homelessness, I say you treat them with the utmost love and respect, because you have benefited from the system that they are homeless from. Yes.
Thank you for that. That's really true and really beautiful. Thank you. We're coming to the end of our time.
Thanks for having me on, Alison.
It's been great. We've been talking with Jodie Evans of Code Pink. Thank you so much, Jodie, for your lived experience and your wisdom and heart. So grateful and lovely to share your wonderful insights and deep wisdom with the listeners of Connect the Dots. Thank you, listeners, for being with us. We'll be back next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the Progressive Radio Network. I'm Alison Rose Levy. Heads up, keep marching tall in company with all our relations.